Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are very excited to be launching the Regional Scholars Program of the Digital Agricultural Innovations and Services Initiative, or as we like to call it, DAISI. DAISI is co-managed by the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab and the Center for Effective Global Action, and is generously funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. My name is Sarah Coughlin, and I'm a policy associate at JPAL. Joining me today is Jennifer Burney, an affiliate co-chair for the initiative at the University of California, San Diego, as well as Amy Hare, a policy manager at JPAL Africa, bringing her expertise from the Digify initiative. We also have a number of DAISI staff on the call as well. Before we get started today, and as I see a few more folks are joining us, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping notes. So I mentioned earlier, but the session will be recorded and sent out after the webinar so that you can access it at any time. We do welcome questions throughout, but we ask that you please use the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat. Staff will be monitoring the Q&A and will be able to answer questions in live time throughout the session. And then just as a final note, we request that you kindly keep your questions today to more general topics that will benefit the group as a whole. If you have specific questions on your proposals or projects, you can definitely direct them to us via email after the call. All right, so I'll start us off today with a brief overview of our organization's and main methodological tool, and then hand it over to Jennifer Burney for an introduction to DAISI's research agenda. From there, we'll describe some of the program components of the Regional Scholars Program. Amy will share some application tips and tricks, and we'll review next steps and upcoming deadlines before opening up for a Q&A session. So our network is a collaboration of researchers across both the SIGA and JPAL affiliate networks, numbering over 260 affiliated researchers that are based at over 90 leading universities around the world. And JPAL and SIGA work across multiple programmatic areas in which research is concentrated around a specific topic. So DAISI here sits within the agriculture sector. Now, as you can see, JPAL and SIGA's missions align very closely. Due to our shared goals, our organizations have a long-standing partnership working together on broad agricultural initiatives. DAISI is just the newest project within this more long-standing collaboration. DAISI is led by 3 academic co-chairs, so Jennifer Burney, who's joining us on this call, as well as Robert Osai at the University of Ghana and Tavneet Suri at MIT. Up here on the screen is all of the staff who work on the initiative. You'll see us answering your emails, reaching out during the application process, and generally just here to help you. All right, so decades of research show that there are many complex drivers of poverty. And as you saw, both SIGA and JPAL's missions are to reduce poverty via rigorous impact evaluations to shed light on this complexity. Our work is just part of the solution, but by testing, innovating, and finding answers to critical questions, we help governments, the private sector, donors, and NGOs to be more effective. Randomized evaluations are the main methodology that we focus on under DAISI. I know that they're probably familiar to most folks in the room, but for those who aren't as familiar, I'm just going to walk us through a brief example outside of agriculture to explain the fundamentals of an RCT. So, randomized evaluations help disentangle the effects of a program from other factors that might affect the outcome or outcomes of interest. For example, imagine you're trying to understand how a math tutoring program affects students' test scores. You determine eligibility requirements such that only students with test scores below a certain cutoff are eligible to receive the tutoring program. Within this group, there's going to be variation in students' characteristics. Some students will be stronger students overall, marked here by the darker orange color, and some will be weaker, marked by the lighter orange color. So how would we measure impact here? We'd like to know how much of the change in test scores is attributable to the math tutoring program versus attributable to other factors, such as access to resources at home, or maybe some other factors that we can't observe, like how motivated the students are. One option could be to let school officials determine who in this whole eligible population should receive extra tutoring, and then compare their outcomes to another group of eligible students that did not receive the program. The school officials might assign tutoring to those that they feel need it the most, the weaker students. Yet, this means that the students who receive the program are systematically different, in this case, systematically weaker, from those who don't receive the program. And so as a result, we can't disentangle the effect of the program from the effect of students' inherent abilities and other factors on their test scores. For example, it could be that the program was really effective and that students wouldn't have done well without it. It could also be that students would have caught up anyway and that the program didn't do much. So instead, we'd need to compare how the students would have done with the program to how they would have done without the program. This is called the counterfactual. In an ideal world, we would observe the counterfactual by seeing how a group of students did with the tutoring program, then go back in time and observe how they would have performed without the tutoring program. Of course, this is impossible, but we can achieve a similar goal by randomly assigning individuals to either receive the program, the intervention group, or to not receive the program, the comparison group. So how does this work in practice? Before a program starts, individuals are randomly assigned to two groups. In expectation, the two groups have comparable characteristics at baseline. Because the only systematic difference between the two groups is the presence of the program, we can assume that they are comparable in terms of average individual characteristics, and then attribute the difference in outcomes to the intervention with a high degree of confidence. In other words, randomization allows for a causal interpretation of the difference between the intervention and the comparison groups. However, while we focus on RCTs because they are a way to rigorously identify causality, there are, of course, restrictions to consider when deciding if an RCT is right for a given program. And this is something we can help you determine at the pre-proposal stage, and we'll share more on this later in the presentation. But in general, under DAISI, randomized evaluations are the methodology that we focus on and fund to answer our research questions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen Burney, who will share a bit more about the goals of our initiative and what those specific research questions are.
Thank you, Sarah. Are you able to hear me? Just a quick check. Great. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, let's get into what DAISI is. Today, I'll provide a general overview of DAISI's research agenda and priority themes, but more information, detailed information on each of these topics can be found in the DAISI framing paper, which we will drop in the chat right now. And we highly encourage teams to reference this document as they're preparing their research questions and proposals. All right, DAISI aims to generate a rigorous evidence base that carefully identifies whether digital tools and bundled approaches are effective in improving outcomes for small-scale producers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Small-scale producer outcomes could include uptake of input credit, diversification into new crops, yields, income, and perceived ability of farmers to cope with shocks or stresses. Additionally, we have a strong focus on women and youth related to their participation in and benefits from digital agricultural services. And our focus on climate includes both identifying less environmentally detrimental food production methods and practices, as well as testing interventions that improve the climate resilience of farmers and production systems. So DAISI aims to explore these priority themes via evaluations of interventions that are both digital and bundled. Some examples of digital services include radio, television, mobile phones, computer, and network hardware and software, and all the associated services, applications, and devices such as video conferencing and distance learning, satellite systems, GPS, geodata, and georeferencing systems, remote sensors, drones, and artificial intelligence. Excuse me. In addition to digital, we are focused on bundled. So when considering whether a service is bundled, we consider a number of productivity constraints targeted by the service, rather than the mechanism or structure of the service itself. So for example, a service that uses SMS messaging to provide general information about correct input use to farmers, and that also connects them to nearby markets to purchase fertilizers, seeds, or other inputs, would alleviate both the information and the access to input and output market constraints identified by DAISI, and so would be considered a bundle. More generally, bundles are relaxing two or more constraints faced by farmers simultaneously, and more examples of bundled services are included in the matrix annex in this DAISI framing paper that has been put into the chat. We'd like to note here that while a bundle could include an analog or in-person delivery component and does not have to be fully digital, we do require that at least one component of the bundle be delivered digitally to qualify. So entirely non-digital interventions will not be considered for funding under DAISI. Within the broader purview of identifying tools and strategies to improve outcomes for small-scale producers, DAISI has identified priority themes that each contain a set of research questions. And they move sort of from the micro here on the left to sort of more macro in the middle. In addition, we encourage each of those research questions to be considered through the lens of one or more of our three cross-cutting themes over here on the right. And we have additionally developed sets of questions for each theme of gender, youth and agriculture, and resource use and climate resilience. Again, more information on the cross-cutting and priority themes, including the sets of research questions that we have identified as the most relevant and pressing for each, can be found in the DAISI framing paper, and that will be in sections A through G. We highly encourage research teams to closely read these sections while developing research questions. Proposals that don't align with the research agenda laid out in the framing paper will not be considered for funding. So again, I believe we will drop that link in again, just to make sure anyone who has joined in the past few minutes will have access to it. All right, I will pass this back to Sarah to continue.
Hey, thanks so much, Jen. So I'll just start us off with a bit more on the funding categories and eligibility criteria for the Regional Scholars Program. In order to be eligible to apply as a regional scholar under DAISI, you need to have already completed a PhD in economics or a related field. And you also need to be currently based in an academic institution in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. With that being said, only one person on the project needs to fulfill this definition. So if there are 3 or 4 academics or primary investigators on the research team, only one of them needs to meet the eligibility criteria in order for the team to apply. We definitely welcome teams with multiple researchers and co-PIs to apply for funding as a team. There are 3 types of funding that you can apply for. Travel or proposal development grants are eligible for funding of up to $10,000 USD, and pilot studies are eligible for funding of up to $75,000. Scholars who successfully complete a pilot project funded by either JPAL or SIGA are then eligible to apply for full randomized evaluation funding, and that's up to $500,000. Given that, we will go more into detail on just the travel or proposal development and the pilot type grants in the next section. I just want to note here that on the request for proposals page that's on the DAISI website, there are proposal guideline documents for each type of proposal that walk you through exactly what is required in the application. And proposals will need to include each of the required categories that are outlined in those documents. So we highly encourage research teams to look closely at them before submission. An important component of the Regional Scholars Program is the mentorship component. Targeted mentorship will be provided to all regional scholars who receive DAISI funding, and this mentorship will extend for the length of the project. Mentors can be any JPAL or SIGA affiliated professor or invited researcher, and scholars may either identify a mentor themselves or staff can facilitate this partnership. Each research team will develop and sign an agreement with their mentor outlining how they want to work together, but the general expectation is that teams will meet with mentors about once a month. The mentorship component is intended as a way to advise on the design of a specific randomized evaluation in the ideation and piloting phases. So in sum, mentors will provide guidance while still allowing the scholars to drive their own research agenda and to have full ownership of the project. I do want to highlight here that mentors are not co-authors on projects. They are someone to come to for advice and to provide friendly guidance, just like a senior member in an academic department would. And with that, I'll hand it over to Amy, who will go into a bit more depth on the types of proposals I talked about and application best practices.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. This is a really exciting initiative. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing all the proposals that come through. So I'm Amy. I'm a policy manager, JPAL Africa. I've been working on the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative, Digify, for a number of years now. And I guess as a staff member, I have reviewed a number of proposals, and we have an African Scholars component, which was kind of the inspiration for the Regional Scholars Program. And so we've consolidated some of our lessons learned on kind of the application best practices. And so I'll be sharing some of these lessons and hopefully some tips so that you have the highest likelihood of success when you're submitting your proposals. So we've kind of been able to identify a couple of key pieces when we as staff are reviewing the proposals that are particularly important. So the 4 kind of buckets, and I'll go into each of them in slightly more detail, but they're around, the first one is around having a really strong research idea. The next is this sort of pathway to a randomized evaluation. And as Sarah explained earlier, you'll kind of know what a randomized evaluation is, and also noting that it's not always the most appropriate method, but given that we're JPAL, we're kind of focusing on those as part of our funding options. So having that clear pathway is fairly important. The third is around the application guidelines. So making sure you're ticking all the boxes. And then really important is kind of how it's written. So being very clear, succinct, simple in your language, so that your message is very well communicated of what you're trying to do. But we'll dig into each of these right now. Great. So what makes a strong research idea? I think there are a couple of areas that are particularly important when thinking about kind of the idea and the concept. So the first is that the project itself is academically interesting. And this for us kind of means that the idea and the question that you're planning to answer is kind of at the frontier of that kind of the research field. So this means that the project is making some sort of contribution to the literature in general, and that it's fairly well placed and positioned within the existing literature. We find that projects that are better motivated and draw in the empirical literature, the existing empirical literature, and then show how the project itself is adding and building on the existing literature is a strong kind of signal to reviewers. The next is about policy relevance. So we want to make sure that the projects that we're funding are useful to policymakers as they're making decisions. I think DAISI is interesting one because I think it's maybe a little bit more private sector focused than what Digify is, but making sure that the research that you're producing can be used and is kind of solving a pressing problem that the partner is facing. So we want to make sure that it's kind of generalizable in some way, useful, and kind of well motivated from the kind of the policy side. Then the third is that it fits within the DAISI research agenda. So we've kind of explored that already, and we have the framing paper. So being able to clearly argue for why this project and this research idea fits within the scope is very important. And then the final kind of piece on this is that the research idea is kind of, it's a randomizable idea. So there's some sort of cause and effect that you can see. And so we sometimes receive projects where there isn't sort of a clear, it's not a cause and effect question. And although they're very important questions and should still be explored, we would not be able to fund those kinds of projects. So also important to keep in mind. And then the next sort of bucket of, or second topic, which kind of links to the previous one, is this pathway to a randomized evaluation. So the question itself needs to have some sort of cause and effect. But even if you're working on a proposal development grant, we will still want to see this kind of pathway to a larger RCT. So this generally means that there is some sort of intervention that you're planning to evaluate, or there is sort of some planned intervention that you intend to potentially evaluate in the future. The proposal development grants can be are fairly flexible in that you might be exploring the different barriers, or you don't quite have the intervention completely signed and sealed and finalized. But what we want to see in the proposals are that there's this kind of your question and your thinking towards this larger project, and how your proposal development grant would help you understand certain aspects in the planning towards that larger project. And then I think with the pilots, you need to have a fairly clear research question. You need to show this pathway to a larger project. You need to have stronger buy-in. You need to be quite clear on how you will be able to lead towards a larger RCT. And then making sure that the proposal is really simple, succinct, and clearly written. I think I can't emphasize the point of being very, very clear in your writing. I think that this should never be underestimated. I think having a very, very succinct and clear written form is pretty important, and will limit kind of the back and forth that is happening between the PI team and the DAISI kind of admin side. So some tips before you start and as you're writing. So the first is around having a fairly clear structure before writing, always pretty useful. Being quite clear on the title of the proposal. The reviewers will be reading your proposals fairly quickly, so having a really clear title, which really captures the essence of the project, is pretty important. Being clear on the relevant literature really does help, especially the empirical sort of RCT literature. Being able to show that you understand the previous studies and being able to build on it. Being clear and concise in your language. And then some tips on making sure you review your proposal and potentially having others review your proposal who maybe aren't kind of as in the weeds in the details, to see if there are any sort of points that might not be coming through as clearly as you anticipated. And also, I think that there's benefits in having somebody kind of a fresh perspective on somebody reviewing your proposal, as you want to really be kind of clear on really spelling out all the mechanisms and being clear on what outcomes you're looking for. And I think having that fresh set of eyes can sometimes help you kind of identify where you're in your head, you know what it means, but it might be not as clearly communicated to somebody else. And then always following the application guidelines, very important. So we have kind of an overview document on exactly what needs to be in all these proposals. But so I think, and hopefully Brenda or Emily will pop it in the chat, but making sure that you have all the different pieces that we ask for, also really important, and also limits the back and forth as part of that application process. So for the proposal development grants, having that your kind of topic statement, your proposed partners, and indicating if it's within scope. very important. And then for the full proposal grant, we have, it's a little bit more in depth. So having a strong proposal narrative, all the budget work, as well as letters of support. And then this slide is just gives a couple of resources from a writing perspective. If you're interested, we can also, I will likely share these slides as well after the presentation. So you'll be able to access them. But if you are interested and want some inspiration on either writing or want to be inspired by some of the other JPAL affiliates who have really interesting research, you can also have a look at how they're writing and review kind of what others would have been doing to be able to build those lessons into your proposal. But I think that is my final slide, so I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Emily. Oops, gave it away, but there. Thanks so much, Amy. I'm actually going to hand it over to Emily, who will share a bit more on next steps.
Thanks so much, Sarah. You can go to the next slide. So we want to preempt some of your more logistical and process-based questions with this slide. We're happy to talk more about them in the Q&A session, but we wanted to walk you through what the process looks like after this webinar. So all eligible regional scholars are invited to think about and creatively brainstorm a project that they're interested in, whether or not it fits within the DAISI research agenda, and to submit a pre-proposal or a letter of intent. This letter of intent will serve as a screening tool to ensure the eligibility criteria is met, as well as the project is within the scope of DAISI's funding or research agenda. The letter of interest and all application materials will be submitted through JPAL's online portal, and instructions on how to register for an account and access the portal are included on DAISI's RFP page, which Brenda has dropped in the chat already. At this stage, teams are notified by the DAISI team once they receive their pre-proposal materials. If any materials are missing or we have any additional questions, we'll reach out to you before it goes to review. So after we receive pre-proposal submissions, these letters of intent are reviewed by the JPAL staff. Then they're sent to the DAISI co-chairs or board officers, including Jen, to ensure that the idea is within the scope. After the pre-proposal is approved as being scope relevant, the DAISI staff will reach back out to research teams to schedule a call and to walk through how we can help answer any of your questions related to the full submission process, the asks that we have on the full proposal requirements, which is a much more in-depth process and requires many more resources and answering many more detailed questions about the project in hand. So once you have the call with the DAISI team, we'll confirm your eligibility and send your proposal through to be open to submit the full proposal, which will be the next step. We'll have you submit your full proposals through the DAISI RFP process, which all of that information can be found on the website, as I mentioned already. Once proposals are submitted, it'll go through to staff review. We'll ask you to answer any questions that we might have. If any materials are missing, we'll follow up on that as well. Then it will go to academic peer review and then on to the full DAISI board for reviewing the proposals as an entire portfolio. Once the DAISI board makes a final decision on funding and or if they have additional questions, that will be sent through an R&R process. After that process is finalized, successful research teams under the Scholars Program will be matched with a mentor from the JPAL and SIGA network. And then research teams will be asked to hold a call with their mentor and complete the mentor-mentee agreement. After that, the proposal will be accepted. You'll receive your award letters and we'll begin the process of contracting and grant disbursement, hopefully soon after that. In terms of timeline, Sarah, do you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. DAISI's RFP opened last Thursday on July 14th, and we are accepting letters of interest until August 18th. After that, teams should hear back between 2 to 3 weeks afterwards to know if they'll be eligible to apply for a full proposal. Full proposals for those teams who have successfully moved from the LOI stage will be due on September 29th. Any questions on this can be dropped in the Q&A, but there are also many more details on the website that will hopefully answer some of those logistical questions. So with that, we invite you to ask more of your questions in the Q&A. We know that there are a couple here that we want to help address. So I might take a stab at the first one from Leo about the infrastructure to manage grants. And then Amy, I would invite your expertise as well from running the Regional Scholars Program with another JPAL initiative. So as of right now, this is something that we are aware of, and our team has been working very closely with the different awarded scholars and their institutions to set up contracts and relationships between, in this case, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is where JPAL is based and where this initiative sits, with granting institutions or institutes to receive the award. Those conversations are ongoing, and the process has been successful in many cases. In cases where it is too hard or there are roadblocks that we simply can't overcome, those will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and our finance and operations team will reach out to you and try to navigate next steps to help make sure that you get the funding that you need to run your proposal development grant or your pilot grant. This is most relevant for pilot and full-scale randomized evaluations, as most travel and proposal development grants are actually on a cost reimbursable basis. And so that is sort of a different process. Amy, do you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay.
I mean, I think currently, at least from a Digify side, we haven't come to this roadblock just yet. But I think that if a project is successful or proposal is successful, we'll, as you say, look at it case by case and see what we can do and make a plan.
Great, thank you. I see a question here on the timeline between the proposal submission to final acceptance. That is a great question, and it varies depending on the time of the year and timing, but we do aim to have this be as short as 4 weeks, but can take up to 6 weeks after the decision call happens. We'll be able to provide more information on that once full submissions come through, but that's about the range that we aim to respond to staff or to research teams, excuse me. Thank you for the question on the mentoring relationship. Amy, again, I'd invite you to answer this from your perspective. The mentor is really a senior academic who is either an invited researcher to JPAL or SIGA or an affiliated professor who has volunteered and welcomed the idea to sort of mentor new teams who are engaging in maybe randomized control trials for the first time to help guide proposal teams in their ideas. So the project itself, to answer any questions about feasibility, viability, all of those kinds of things, but also in the design of the evaluation itself to help think through some problems, pros and cons, things to be aware of, and to generally be an assistance as somebody who's already in the JPAL and SIGA network on how to navigate some of the deliverables at the end of receiving a grant and things like that. Amy, is there anything else that you want to add about the mentoring relationship?
No, I mean, I think that's fair. I think that the intention of this is not to be a co-author in any way. So that's not the expectation. It's more that you would be kind of leading your project. And this is just a friendly face, kind of a senior colleague who is at a different university that can kind of reflect on the project with you, maybe help you thinking through some of like the burning questions that you have, help you think through kind of IRB processes, or connect you to resources, or if there are survey instruments that you need, or maybe they know of something that could help and assist you in the project. So I think that's kind of the intention of the role of the mentor. And yeah, there's this mentor-mentee agreement that is set up at the kind of the start of the project. The intention of this agreement is just to make sure that expectations are very clear from both sides, and that both sides are very, know how this is going to roll out. And there's like some sort of agreement between groups to start with. And when it comes to kind of the connection with the mentors, so if you have an existing relationship with a JPAL affiliate or a SIGA affiliate or anybody else who is categorized as a mentor, you can let us know as part of your application. And we could then do our best to match you with that person. But in the case that you don't have a JPAL affiliate or SIGA affiliate who could act as a mentor, we have a bit of an internal process of then matching you with somebody who has volunteered. So you don't need to make that connection yourself. We would be able to do that for you. Yeah, and then go for it, Emily.
Oh, I was just going to say there is no cost because they're members of our network. They are volunteering their time. So there will be no need to budget for paying them or any kind of grant to the mentor themselves. Sorry, Amy, did you want to add anything else? I apologize for interrupting you. Okay. Okay, in terms, Robertson, I do want to answer your question about the environment. So I think that this question is probably better answered by our framing paper, so I would invite you to turn there, but I will highlight that one of our cross-cutting themes is very related to the environment and climate change. And so a project that is both a digital and bundled approach that addresses resource use and climate resilience for small-scale agricultural producers or other actors in an agricultural value chain would be eligible to apply under DAISI. So if you have a specific question, there are lots of sort of guiding and goalposts in the framing paper that can help to sort of tease out the details of eligibility. I hope that answered your question. In response to the question about academia collaborating with private service providers, we encourage that as private sector service providers are often the holders of the programs or the bundles themselves. And so partnering as an implementer, or even if there is somebody on the team who wants on the service providing in the private sector wants to be a part of the research team, that is also acceptable. The only requirement here is that we ask that teams ensure that the researchers maintain freedom to publish after the fact, and there's more details about that in the RFP language and general FAQs as well. In terms of the question about team members being chosen, we invite you to find your own co-PIs and to apply either by yourself for your own research project, or to work with people in your own academic institution, or if you want to work across institutions or even with other members of think tanks. The co-PI restriction is very, very limited. So we don't have any restrictions on co-PIs, just that the main regional scholars fits the eligibility criteria as we laid out in this presentation. And as far as I know, there is no limitation on the number of collaborators in a project. And so feel free to build your teams as works for you. So there's a question about the composition of the research team. So I just want to reiterate again, the research team can be built and composed as you see fit as the scholar. So you can bring in any collaborators that you think would help to help you reach the goal of the end project, and the mentor will be involved after the proposal has been approved by the DAISI board, and it'll be somebody who is interested in a similar topic, has had lots of experience either in the country, region, context, or a similar research question. And so we'll match based on best fit. But if you have a mentor that you would like to work with who is a JPAL or SIGA affiliate, you can also propose that and we can try to connect you that way as well. There is a question about the population of research, and so I will ask you to check the framing paper for that question as well. But in short, it is small-scale agricultural producers that are based in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia, or other actors in an agricultural value chain. So there are open questions that relate to middlemen, to exporters, to market actors beyond sort of these broad terms. And so if your population of interest is anyone who works in an agricultural value chain, either on the provision of the service to incentivize them to expand their services, or the farmers themselves, that could be eligible under some of the relevant questions in the framing paper.
I just want to briefly expand on that question. I think the study population also was in regards to like geographic scope. So the scope of our proposals do need to be within sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. They don't necessarily need to include the sample within an entire country or region, depending on relevant sample size, etc.
I see a question in here about minimum sample criteria, and we don't have a minimum sample criteria for pilots. We'll just ask that you explain that your study is powered to be able to reach the outcomes that you're looking for. But this is, I think, a little bit less relevant for the travel and proposal development grants. And then others on the Secretariat, and Jen, of course, feel free to jump in and answer any of these questions, either live or typing them. I just saw a question come in about the number of proposals that we're expecting. We don't have any expectations because this is an open call for proposals. We're hoping to see what comes in and where a lot of the proposals are based and where teams are really coming together. And so we don't have any quotas to have to fund in a certain country or on a certain topic. And so invite any and all ideas to especially come through in this first call for proposals. In terms, I think there are a couple questions in here about proposal development grants and pilots. And so Amy, I would invite you to talk about the pathway here. But in general, teams can apply for both types of grants as long as they are different projects. So we don't want a proposal to come in with the same research question or with the same subsample or project for both types of grants. Will often sort of slot you into one or the other at the LOI stage. But you are eligible to apply for one or the other. And in terms of the pathway, I'll hand it over to Amy to talk a little bit about the experience from just Digify.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that we've had projects that have come in at both the proposal development grant stage, and then kind of through that process, then the kind of relationships have been formed with partners, and some maybe focus groups have been done, some kind of understanding the barriers to take up have been kind of explored through that process. The research question has been well defined, and then that project has then been resubmitted to become as a pilot, and then kind of hopefully they will progress on to full RCT in the future. So there's sort of this pathway of kind of incubating your idea, building relationships, building the study, and hopefully moving on to the next stage of pilot, and then hopefully moving on to the next stage as full RCT. That said, if you have a clear research idea, you have the partners, you have your kind of data sharing agreement set up, you've got your MOUs, you're kind of quite, you're on your way to kind of run a pilot automatically without having to go through the proposal development grant stage. At least from Digify, and I'm assuming this is the same with DAISI, you can apply directly as a pilot. You don't need to kind of go through the proposal development grant stage first in order to get to pilot. If your project is mature enough in itself to apply directly to a pilot, that's fabulous. So yeah, you have these two different options, but it really depends on how mature your research idea is, if you have all the components that would be needed in order to run a successful pilot. But yeah, I mean, I'd encourage you, I think if you're not sure of where you fit, I think in the kind of LOI stage, doing the pre-proposal calls with staff, they'll often be able to guide you for you to figure out which level you should be kind of sitting at. And yeah, I mean, I think I also see some of the proposal development grant work as both building a proposal, but also thinking of it a little bit as a pre-pilot in some ways. So if there's some components that would help you doing the focus groups, kind of digging into the research question, I think that's quite useful in your thinking and knowing if a pilot really would be feasible, unpacking kind of some of the key areas that you really want to dig into before investing a large amount of money and time into a pilot. So I think that initial stage is really important. But if you have been able to do that on your own and you're kind of ready and gunning for a pilot already, feel free to apply straight away.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Amy. I did notice that there are two folks who have hands up. So I'm not sure, Sarah, if we can unmute folks or if we can ask them to drop their questions in the chat.
I believe I can go ahead and unmute.
Okay, great. We have about 6 minutes left, so we'll ask that you keep your questions relatively concise if they haven't been answered already.
Great, thanks, Emily. Joyce, I'm gonna start with you.
Sorry, I raised my hand by mistake. I'm good. I'm good on everything.
Gotcha.
Great,
No
thank you
worries
so
at
much.
all. Alrighty. All right, Pim Farrell, if you want to go ahead and share your question, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice presentation. I think I've missed the initial, the first slides of the presentation, but from our side, we are eager to apply for the project part. Yes, we are in the academic institution, we can go for the research, but looking at the project and the research combination in our side is the side that we want to vie for. So I want to ask, can it be possible to combine the project as well as the research as a combined system, or it goes independent in that section? Like, can it go independent, or we can combine? Thank you.
I think that I understand the question, but feel free to tell me if this answer is unsatisfactory. So under the research funding, we cannot fund implementation activities, and so the money that you receive from JPAL will not be able to be used to fund the program itself. But if you want to build an evaluation into the program itself, we definitely encourage that. And then you can apply to JPAL to evaluate the program, but we are unable to sort of provide any funding to support program activities. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you have answered the question. So that means that JPAL more only focus much on research, and
That's
also
right.
in the areas that you have stipulated that they are the areas that we need to focus on.
That's exactly right. Given that we're near the end, we did want to flag that there are two other African Scholars programs through JPAL. One is Digify, which Amy manages, and it's the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative that is based out of the Africa office. And so you can also check their web pages to see if your proposal might fit a bit more, or your project might fit a bit more with their research scope. And similarly, if you're interested in questions around jobs and opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa, the JOY initiative, which is as it's named, Jobs and Opportunities Initiative, is also accepting proposals that are related to its research agenda. And then for scholars based in India, if you are interested in child health, the Catch initiative also has an Indian scholars program, and you can read a little bit more about their opportunities. Of course, each initiative operates independently, and so you'll need to find information on those different initiatives on the JPAL website. But we hope that this was useful for you to understand DAISI, and we thank you all so much for joining us today. There are a couple more questions in the chat. I think maybe if we can answer them typing, it might be better than holding everybody else here, since we only have about 3 minutes left. So as Sarah said, the webinar has been recorded, and we'll be posting it on the Regional Scholars webpage for DAISI, so that if you have any questions, you missed any part of the presentation, you can go back and reference it as you need. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are very much looking forward to seeing all of your proposals and your letters of interest come in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you all so much for attending. We're really looking forward to see the exciting proposals and projects that come in. I just want to highlight that again, if you have specific questions about your proposals or projects, please feel free to reach out to us over email. We're more than happy as staff to talk through any specific questions that you might have. And hopefully having this as a resource, as well as everything in the websites that have been dropped in the chat, will help you out along the way. Thank you again to Jen Burney and Amy Hare for joining us today. And thanks everyone.